Hey guys, Pie Guy Rules here, and I thought I'd do something a little bit different this year with the holiday reviews. This time I'm going to be reviewing them all in one big video, like I do with SpongeBob. This should definitely be interesting, because about half of these I saw a lot as a kid and remember pretty vividly, and the other half that I didn't see very often, if at all. And in most cases, that's for good reason. But let's not waste time. Let's get right to the reviews. So let's get things started with a What a Cartoon short. For those of you who don't know, What a Cartoon was the cartoon anthology series on Cartoon Network that ultimately led to the Cartoon brand being formed. Think of it as a pilot, if you will, which is quite fitting because this series featured a lot of shorts that would go on to become cartoons, like Dexter's Lab, The Powerpuff Girls, and Johnny Bravo. But for every memorable short on the show, there was like 3 or 4 that were not very good. But hey, that's the entire point. You throw a bunch of shorts at the wall and see what sticks. One of those shorts was George and Junior's Christmas Spectacular. After delivering a letter to Santa too late, George and Junior have to deliver a gift to a house with a wild dog. So I had no clue who George and Junior were. At first glance, they just appear to be like discount versions of Two Stupid Dogs, which in and of themselves are pretty much discount versions of Ren and Stimpy. But that's not the case, because George and Junior predate Ren and Stimpy and Two Stupid Dogs by like 5 decades. Apparently the two bears were in a handful of MGM cartoons directed by Tex Avery, way back in the 40s, and got revived for 2 shorts in the What a Cartoon show. It's not really surprising that I thought this was a ripoff of Ren and Stimpy when it does the whole shtick of there being a big fat character who's stupid and constantly screwing things up, and a smaller short-tempered character always there to punish the bigger one for screwing up. It's a cartoon staple, but the history lesson ends here. How is the short itself? It's pretty bad, to be quite honest with you. The animation is really poor. Like, there's a lot of scenes where only one small thing will be moving. I mean, even for Hanna-Barbera animation, this is particularly stiff. One thing I can say is that even though the animation is limited, the drawings themselves are kind of creative. They're definitely going for that abstract stuff that Ren and Stimpy does, with characters making all sorts of crazy faces and gestures. In terms of the story, this is just very minimal, very been-done-before stuff. Combine the typical plot of characters having to fill in for Santa with typical plot of guard dog prevents characters from getting somewhere. You've seen it a million times with cartoons, but considering this is a gag-based short, it's alright if it's a little bit predictable and cliche in the story department, as long as it's funny. And there's the biggest problem. It's not funny. And I guess it goes back to the fact that I've seen these type of characters a lot. I've seen this shtick where the small guy gets mad at the big dumb guy. It's just not really funny or interesting here. And when I don't find the central shtick of the characters to be funny or surprising or interesting in any way, then of course the entire short is gonna flop. And I'm sure back in the 40s that shtick wasn't totally played out. I'm sure some of these style gags would have worked a lot better back then, but this was made in 1995. By then, we already had Ren and Stimpy, and we know exactly how this goes. And even though I'm not a big fan of Ren and Stimpy, I can tell that they do that style humor way better than this short did. And, of course, being as gag-based and silly as it is, there's not really any sort of heartwarming or Christmassy moments that can otherwise redeem an episode that's not particularly funny. So, yeah, overall, this thing is just not interesting in the least. If you want to see some good animated shorts that are gag-based like this, then look to classic Warner Brothers cartoons, because they blow this way out of the water. Really, the only thing interesting or memorable about this is how creepy Santa is. His body is a perfect circle, his skin tone is turquoise, his eyes randomly bulge out, and the way he just kind of rambles when he talks is just eerie. Now it's time for Johnny Bravo's first Christmas episode, 'Twas the Night. After mistakenly hurting Santa, Johnny must fill in for him to set things right. Have I mentioned I love it when stories are all told in rhyme? Oh yeah, I did, last year, about this time. It just fills the episode with so much charm, though if done poorly, it can cause a lot of harm. I'm gonna stop rhyming now because I really just kind of want to talk about this episode freely without having to be constrained by what words I can rhyme. So this short actually really surprised me. Of course I remember watching it as a kid, and I remember liking it, but I did not remember it being this good. The rhyming thing really does add a layer of charm and makes the episode stand out amongst all others. It seems to fit really well with Christmas episodes. And we probably have Dr. Seuss and the Grinch to thank for that. And I should note before someone corrects me that the entire thing isn't technically in rhyme. There's a few one-liners that characters have that breaks the rhyme, but there's not many, and they're mostly just throwaway one-liner gags, so it's not a big deal. The episode is like 99% in rhyme. But all that rhyming stuff stuff aside, the meat of the episode is actually really nice and not mean-spirited at all, surprisingly. I kept expecting there to be some sort of dark twist to it all, but no. Santa's not really mad at Johnny, he just knows he's an idiot. And Johnny does a really good job as Santa. He only actually screws up one delivery. And it's to his mom, showing that he was thinking about all the world's children and not just his family. Even the ending isn't mean-spirited. It does have a joke that Santa's coming back for Johnny next year for round 2, and he gives Johnny some boxing gloves, but that's all in good fun. Santa doesn't feel like a real jerk, just that he's messing with Johnny a little bit. Granted, there really is a round 2, but we'll talk about that when it comes up. Seeing as this segment is in the 4th episode of the show, I didn't expect there to be so many cameos from characters. Like the mayor of Aron City, Jungle Boy, that one bear with the alarm clocks, and even Scooby-Doo. And speaking of Scooby-Doo, the comedy in this episode is really on point. What Johnny gives Scooby-Doo, as the narrator says, isn't a box of Scooby snacks, it's speech therapy lessons. And of course, there's the obligatory jokes about the mayor being corrupt, and even a subtle one about the mayor cheating on his wife. And there's all sorts of sight gags with Johnny delivering presents around the world. It's really jam-packed with action, sweet moments, and comedy. It's amazing how much they were able to squeeze into 7.5 minutes. And it goes to show that just because a plot device is cliche, like having the main character deliver presents to Santa, doesn't mean that it can't be interesting. And that's the benefit of a show's style, and Johnny Bravo is just dripping with style. Though it utilizes something we've seen before a lot, it puts its own Johnny Bravo spin on it. Go ahead and use the cliches as long as you're going to do something with them. And lastly, I have to mention the first thing that I noticed about this special. It's narrated by Adam freaking West. I know he does a lot of voiceover work for cartoons, but he is such a pleasant surprise in this episode. He has a great voice for narration. It's soft and gentle and easy on the ears without being boring. I love this episode, and it proves that you really don't need to do anything big, elaborate, and crazy to have a good Christmas episode. It's everything you'd hope for and more from a Johnny Bravo Christmas episode, and I really recommend you check this one out. Happy Baboon Holidays. When Weasel takes in Baboon's family, Baboon gets jealous. So again, this style of humor is very quick, very visual gag based, and very much like Ren and Stimpy. It's over the top, it's loud, it's crazy, though this episode is definitely coherent and not incredibly surreal. As a whole, I have to say this short is pretty lackluster. There's certainly nothing wrong with it. The episode basically goes through the motion of a Christmas episode, with Baboon's family arriving and Weasel taking them in after they get frozen outside when Baboon neglects to bring them in. And then you play through the typical I Am Weasel shtick where Baboon gets super jealous and he throws a tantrum and then Weasel has to come in and bail him out and make him happy. In the laughs department, there's a few jokes, but nothing revolutionary, nothing amazing, nothing really even worth mentioning, to be honest. But this episode does hit on some Christmassy notes. It does have a happy and kind of sweet ending. It does feature the spirit of giving. Santa Claus makes a little appearance. So it hits about all of the points that a typical I Am Weasel episode would, with a few Christmassy moments in there. I just don't find I Am Weasel to be that interesting in general. And though it hits the points, it's not like it does anything particularly well. The comedy is just kind of okay. The little sweet moments are there, but they're not fantastic or brilliantly done or anything like that. If someone else in my family really liked this special, then sure, I wouldn't mind watching it with them. But there are so many episodes out there and so many shows that are a lot better than this that I really don't see the point in seeking it out on your own. So, kinda bland, but certainly not bad. Dexter vs. Santa's Claus. Dexter assaults Santa, believing him to be his father. It must be some kind of weird holiday tradition to have your boy genius character be insanely stupid come Christmas time. Granted, that was always kind of one of Dexter's shticks, was that he was a genius, but he was lacking in a lot of common sense. However, I like this episode a lot more than Jimmy Neutron's, mostly because this is a short, so the premise being a little bit silly and absurd doesn't really bother me as much because it's just quick and gag-based, though there is a few things I take issue with. I think the short would have been a lot better if it had just kept its focus on Dexter trying to shave Santa Claus instead of trying to gun him down in an airship. I mean, at that point, it's a lot less wacky and silly and a lot more like, holy cow, Dexter's gonna kill Santa, who he also thinks is his dad. That's another thing I would have probably changed as well, like how if instead of thinking Santa Santa was his dad. He thought Santa was some kind of burglar or scam artist, kinda like in Johnny Bravo's 'Twas the Night. You could make the story so that Dee Dee and Dexter are still fighting about whether Santa Claus is real or not, and then when Dexter sees Santa, he automatically assumes it's some sort of robber or bad guy. The story would still play out very similarly, but at least Dexter would be a lot more justified in his actions. Especially because he was always trying to hide his lab from his parents. If his dad knew he had a giant airship, I think he might be a little bit suspect. But hey, there are some things to like about this, like Dexter rapping. No, not presents, like actually rapping, in a hilariously bad way. I also like that he has the line, "Extreme Science." The Santa in this special is another unusual one in that he can only say ho up until the very end. And I kinda like that quirk. It definitely sets him apart from other Santas without making him super creepy or weird. Though, of course, a little bit of fridge logic sinks in when you realize that if Santa can actually speak, as he does at the very end, why didn't he even try to say anything to Dexter to get him to stop attacking him? Overall, there's some decent action and a few clever gags. As a regular short, it's mildly funny. As a Christmas short, and in fact the only time Dexter celebrated Christmas on his show, it's pretty disappointing. Definitely not worth checking out. Next up, another I Am Weasel episode. IR's first bike. Weasel tries to teach Baboon to ride a bike he got for Christmas. So first off, I guess I should explain the whole I Am Weasel Cow and Chicken thing. See, I Am Weasel aired as the second segment in between two Cow and Chicken shorts on Cow and Chicken. Kind of like how Dexter's Lab had Dial M for Monkey and the Justice Friends. Eventually, Weasel spun off into its own show, where it got a handful of new shorts, as well as re-airing some of the ones from Cow and Chicken. So that's why that side said it was both I Am Weasel and Cow and Chicken, when this one just says I Am Weasel, and is also Season 1, despite being much, much later. But semantics out of the way, I like this episode a lot more than Happy Baboon Holidays. It's basically one of those typical cartoon plots where the characters try to do something over and over and over again, and fail in hilarious ways. In this case, it's Weasel trying to teach Baboon how to ride a bike, while Baboon keeps crashing in really silly ways. I didn't think it was particularly funny, but I found the format to be entertaining and enjoyable. That being said, it has a lot less to do with Christmas than Happy Baboon Holidays. Only the first few minutes and the last minute have anything to do with Christmas. It's just kind of used as a setup to get us into the main story of IR and the bike. These Christmas bits aren't bad, but they're not used to any great comedic effect, and really, in the grand scheme of things, they're not very important to the story. But it's there, so I'm including this as a quote-unquote Christmas episode. I really don't think this episode is good enough to be worth seeking out, but it's alright, and I'd definitely watch it if it was on Cartoon Network. I suppose I should also mention the Santa in this episode has completely lost his mind, as lampshaded by a reindeer. Oh, and I almost forgot the best part of this episode. IR Baboon says he likes pie. Folololo Ed. Ed brings Christmas to the cul-de-sac in July. Before we really dig in here, I'd like to point out that this is the first cartoon Christmas episode that actually aired in December. It's also the first one that's 11 minutes long-ish. And of course, the first one to actually air in December takes place during the summer. Go figure that one out. But anyway, this episode is another real classic. In particular, I really like the opening bit, even before they get to the Christmas stuff. The episode opens with Ed and Eddie messing around in Double D's parents' room, with a lot of good gags and really high energy. For every over-the-top visual gag there's also another more subtle word-based gag. Like the fact that Double D says there's no kissing in his parents' room, which seems like a normal thing to say when your creepy dim-witted friend is fastly approaching you with mistletoe. But when you think about it a little more, especially conjoined with the fact that Double D's parents sleep in separate beds, it gives some really interesting implications into Double D's family. The rest of the episode is no slouch either. It features a pretty creative scam from the Eds in singing Christmas carols and making people pay them or they won't stop. You get to see plenty of karmic justice for Eddie's jerky behavior. And of course, you get to see Ed bring Christmas cheer to everyone. And it's definitely a nice change of pace to see that at the end of the episode, Ed doesn't get punished for Eddie's actions. There's even a really sweet moment where Jimmy offers his piggy bank to Double D, even though Double D was about to smash it as a part of Eddie's scam. Yeah, the episode has a few moments that are really sweet like that, but of course, the episode never gets too sappy with anything. Every time there's a sweet moment, Eddie's just around the corner, ready to act like a spoiled, selfish child and ruin it, but in a very likable way. Oh, and I should definitely mention that Eddie says in this episode that he doesn't like Christmas because all he ever gets is clothes. It plays out like a very typical Ed, Edd n Eddy episode, and I mean that in the best possible way. And while there is a more fitting episode of Ed, Edd n Eddy to watch for Christmas, which we'll be getting to shortly, I would definitely say that this is worth checking out at any time of the year, as long as you like Ed, Edd n Eddy. And I really don't think I have anything bad to say about it, so let's just move on. Home for the days. Sheep visits the farm to get away from a kidnapper. Of all the cartoons, I would have to say I remember Sheep in the Big City the absolute least, even behind Robot Jones and Mike Lewinog. Hey, whatever happened to Robot Jones? So was this a wonderfully pleasant surprise, or is there a good reason this show disappeared from my memory and the airwaves? Yeah, there's a good reason. I don't find this show funny at all. And I find its numerous gags, fake commercials, and little sketches to just go on forever. If you don't know, Sheep is kind of a variety show in the way that between commercials, they would do things like fake commercials and quote-unquote history lessons and little things like that. And in this episode, they are tied into the main plot in that the holiday being celebrated is called Clearance Day, and the little short segments talk about the history of Clearance Day, as well as some stuff to buy for people for Clearance Day. But oh man, does it just go on and on. This is the first cartoon Christmas special to be 21-ish minutes, and trust me, it feels like it. The plot is not the main focus here because so many gags and so many weird things happen that it's really just an afterthought and incredibly bare bones. To try and sum it up would basically be Sheep gets a letter from the farmer telling him he wants Sheep to visit for the holidays. Meanwhile, Sheep gets bought by this little girl like what happened in Cat Dog Christmas, but then he escapes and goes to the farm because he wants to get away from the kidnapping little girl and the military, I guess. And then through a plot device that is literally called Plot Device, the military knows where Sheep is and try to take him from the farmer's house, and then the day is saved thanks to a little urchin boy that was randomly in the farmer's house. But actual plot points like that only take up about 5 minutes of this thing. The rest of it is the narrator recapping events we saw before the commercial, as well as the stupid little side sketches and a bunch of overly long gags within the actual Sheep episode itself. And the best way I could describe this humor is that it is extremely cheesy to the max. Sometimes I find that funny, but because it's just so much of that all the time in this episode, I just got so sick of it so fast. This thing is too random and weird for my tastes. But on the upside, I would prefer a show that tells a lot of jokes that I don't find funny to a show that just doesn't try at all. I mean, a comedy show that doesn't try to tell jokes at all. Because hey, I'm sure some people out there like this style of humor, and if you do, you're in for a treat, I guess. In terms of it being a holiday-themed episode, it doesn't have anything heartwarming in the least. Which would be fine if the jokes were funny or the focus was actually on the plot instead of it being just an afterthought. But as it stands, I really did not like this. There's no kind of official release for Sheep in the Big City, nothing on iTunes, no DVDs, nothing as far as I could see. And although it is a shame to have a show have no official release, I can kind of understand why this show was passed over. No offense to anyone who likes it, but I think it's pretty bad. A Johnny Bravo Christmas. After forgetting to mail his mama's letter to Santa, Johnny must deliver it himself. So this Johnny Bravo Christmas episode is 22 minutes long, and it definitely feels like more of a big, elaborate Christmas special than the modest 'Twas the Night. I like this episode. It's got a lot of the Johnny Bravo shtick of him trying to hit on girls and then beating him up. It also includes some talking animals, which is a staple of the series, and an obligatory reference to Scooby-Doo, plus a random celebrity cameo. Heck, it even mentions previous episodes. Santa remembers Johnny from 'Twas the Night, and even punches him with a boxing glove, as well as the fact that Johnny remembers Donny Osmond from a previous episode, and even remarks on that time he was a part of the French Foreign Legion. Plus, it has the obligatory super sweet moment at the end where Johnny is incredibly selfless. Also, little Susie mentions baby Jesus. Never thought I'd hear the word Jesus in a Cartoon Network show, but there you go. It hits all the notes, and it's a solid Christmas special. I quite enjoy watching this one. However, if given the choice between watching this and 'Twas the Night, I'd pick 'Twas the Night. As enjoyable as this special is, I think that episode managed to do everything this episode did in a shorter amount of time. And I'm not saying that to put down a Johnny Bravo Christmas, only to say that 'Twas the Night is really fantastically made. They're both very enjoyable, and I'd recommend watching both of them this holiday season, but 'Twas the Night is just incredibly well paced, and able to do everything a 22-minute episode can do in only 7.5. The Nutcracker. Courage uses a nutcracker to save Muriel from 2 ballet dancing rats. Well, it's a Courage the Cowardly Dog episode, so obviously it's great, and I don't need to talk about it. Let's just move on. Just kidding, but that is true. And there are very few episodes of this show that aren't really awesome. So this whole thing is basically Courage the Cowardly Dog's rendition of The Nutcracker, which is a classic Tchaikovsky ballet, most well known for its music. Courage the Cowardly Dog was always great at juxtaposing things. And here you have a beautiful ballet with beautiful music that takes place in a dump and performed by 2 giant rats, a dog, and an actual nutcracker. And the rats are indeed doing a ballet dance the entire time. The episode doesn't have too many laughs, though there are a few, like when Muriel gets replaced with a bunch of tires shaped like her. But comedy isn't really what Courage is about. It's about atmosphere and a lot of other things. And a big part of this episode is the music, as well as some of the dancing. I also very much like the use of the nutcracker in this episode. Courage finds an old nutcracker and he uses it throughout the episode in a few creative ways to help him beat the rats. And it's all really imaginative. He uses the nutcracker to help him climb a mountain of garbage, dig a hole, and even fight off the rats in the end. And of course, because it's Courage the Cowardly Dog, there is a really sweet moment at the end. Eustace takes the nutcracker and then violently uses it to crack a walnut, only to break all the nutcracker's teeth, finding out that it's an antique and doesn't actually work. He hands it back to Courage, and at first you think Courage is going to be all sad because he kind of broke the nutcracker, but Courage just opens his mouth to reveal his horribly damaged teeth and show that now him and the nutcracker are one of a kind. This is definitely the most powerful and strongest connection I've ever seen on television between a nutcracker and a dog. But yeah, it's Courage the Cowardly Dog. There's really nothing bad I can say about this episode, other than the fact that it's not super memorable in compared to a lot of other Courage episodes. And I should also mention that if you're having trouble remembering this episode like I was, it's because it did come late in the run, and seasons 1 and 2 seem to be the most replayed on Cartoon Network. The only other thing worth mentioning, really, is the fact that it's only as Christmassy as Nutcrackers and Tchaikovsky's music are, which does have the downside that it really doesn't have any other connection to Christmas. It would have been nice to see what Courage's take on an actual Christmas special would be, but it has the positive of being an episode that's very easy to watch any time of the year. Like I said at the start, it's a Courage episode, so of course I recommend it. Christmas con carne. When Hector puts Santa under mind control, Rupert the reject reindeer must save the day. This episode is okay. Evil Con Carne as a whole was just alright. There was definitely a reason why The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy was way more popular and lasted way longer than this show. The thing about this episode, though, is that it isn't about Hector or Scar or Bosco or really any of the main characters. It's about Rupert, who's a parody of Rudolph. It's kind of weird that a show about villains would want to make a saving Christmas plot. I mean, I get that the villains have to fail, but it's just weird that the focus here isn't on our main characters. Not that there's anything wrong with Rupert as far as Rudolph parodies go. He's got an awesome voice and he flies like he's a Powerpuff Girl, so there's that. Overall, there really isn't much to this special. It's not really funny, there's nothing in the way of heartwarming, the plot isn't super original, though I will say it is at least mildly interesting. As far as I can tell, there's never been an official release on this thing, but if it's on Cartoon Network, I'd say maybe check it out. It's decent, but it's not worth hunting down. 'Twas the fight before Christmas. When Princess puts everyone but her on the naughty list, the Powerpuff Girls must save the day. This special was long. Very, very long. And I don't just say that because it's 42 minutes. I say that because every little thing in this special drags on and on. From the narrator's narrations, to the sequence of Princess breaking into Santa's workshop, to the sequence of Bubbles discovering everyone has gotten coal, to the joke about how the Christmas tree lights aren't working. Every last detail of this is dragged out. It is very clear that this wasn't supposed to have been a 42-minute episode. It's just so slow. And it's so strange because the early episodes of the Powerpuff Girls that I've been watching lately have such a great energy to them. This is just wow. The plot itself is okay, it's nothing brilliant, but it's alright. You have a villain trying to ruin Christmas for everyone but her. It makes sense because Princess wants superpowers from Santa, and she's spoiled enough to want to make sure that she's the only one that gets a ton of presents on Christmas. And it would have worked perfectly had this thing not been so slowly paced. And as far as action and fight scenes, pretty much nothing happens up until the halfway point. And then we get like a 15-minute long fight scene, which is pretty cool, but it goes on too long and it's nothing fantastic. I have a feeling this thing didn't have a big budget. Not just because of the action scenes, but also there's a few animation mistakes, like points where Princess isn't moving her mouth, but she's talking. And the jokes, well, there just aren't many. Aside from the overly long Christmas lights one I mentioned, there's one about how Santa can give people superpowers but no one's ever asked for them, and another one about how the mayor likes what is their universe's equivalent to My Little Pony. So I guess you could call him a hipster brony. But jokes are few and far between. The main thing here is the plot, which is fine, except this thing takes forever to get from one plot point to the next. Unfortunately, I don't recommend this. There are a few decent moments in there, but not a single thing in this is really good. I mean, really, the most interesting thing about this episode is how at the beginning, they list off most of Princess's plots from previous episodes, as well as Buttercup mentioning she wants a BB gun in a Christmas Story reference. It'd be one thing if you sat through all the really slow moments and it gave us some things that are really fantastic, but as it stands, waiting through the slow moments only leads to some alright moments. Overall, I don't think it's worth a watch. But if you are interested, it is available on the full series Powerpuff Girls set, and really nowhere else. Though I have a feeling Cartoon Network still airs it. Next up, Ed, Edd n Eddy's Jingle Jingle Jank. Feeling cheated by his own Christmas gifts, Eddie tries to get himself adopted before Christmas. So, as he said in Fa La 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 Ed, Eddie does indeed get a lot of clothes for Christmas. This special episode had a lot of firsts for the series. It was the first time an episode took place not in the summer, and it was the first time that a new character actually spoke, this time being Santa. It was also the first episode to be inked digitally, giving the show a much cleaner look than ever before. This special is really nice. Ed, Edd n Eddy, much like Courage the Cowardly Dog, knows what it's doing when it comes to creating atmosphere, from the wonderful music to the visually diverse settings of each of the characters' houses. Ed, Edd n Eddy has always been a show that is very focused on its characters, and every single one of them gets a moment to shine in this episode. It's interesting to see how they all celebrate the holidays and interact with Eddie's scam. Going along with that atmosphere thing is that the Kanker Sisters subplot is basically setting up an allegory to baby Jesus' birth. It's just like a neat little reference that at some point in the episode you pick up on. And it's definitely subtle. At first you have no clue where they're going with it. Sure, there are funny moments, like Ed's infamous line about Double D touching his udder, and the plot itself is pretty decent, but the key here is definitely the atmosphere, which is what makes it a very enjoyable viewing experience. In terms of heartwarming moments, let me put it this way. Double D and Ed's entire subplot is about trying to get Eddie to embrace the spirit of the holidays and be a nicer person, which does lead to a sweet moment. However, that moment is kinda ruined by Eddie's behavior afterwards, and I'm on the fence about how I feel about the whole thing. On the one hand, yeah, it would have been nice to have ended this episode on a genuinely sweet note with Eddie learning his lesson. On the other hand, though, that's kind of a boring ending, and I don't really know if it fits in with Eddie's character. Though they did let him learn his lesson in the movies, so I don't know. But I can say it is pretty funny just how fast Eddie can go from being nice and learning his lesson to complete selfish monster again. As far as his jerkiness throughout the rest of the episode, I think it's perfectly fine. First of all, it's pretty much a tradition to have a Christmas curmudgeon, so it certainly works for the Christmas special, but what also works about it is that Ed, Double D, and the entire neighborhood call Eddie out for his horrible behavior. And it even comes from a somewhat justifiable place. Yeah, it kinda stinks to get clothes for Christmas as a kid, especially when you know all your friends are gonna get cool stuff. That doesn't mean you should forsake your family and try and get yourself adopted, but Eddie's frustration does come from a realistic and understandable place. It would have also been nice in the ending if Ed and Double D did get away from the Kankers, because really, they do not deserve that treatment. But that doesn't ruin what is otherwise a very enjoyable special. Oh, and I should also say this is probably the only Christmas special I've ever seen to actually reference Christmas crackers. It's a popular thing to do around Christmas time in the UK and I guess a few other places. My family does it every year because my descendants are from Wales. They're basically these tubes that you take one end of and another person takes the other end of, and you pull them and there's a little spark and then there's a toy inside. Whoever gets the middle piece attached to their end piece gets to keep the toy and the crown and all that stuff. Or one person can just pull on both sides like they do in the special. Billy and Mandy save Christmas. After Santa is turned into a vampire, Billy, Mandy, and Grim must save him. Let me just tell you right off the bat the best part of this special. Gilbert Gottfried playing a monstrous vampire Santa Claus. This is one of the best examples of casting I've ever seen, and it definitely makes the Grim Adventures Santa stand out. Also, Malcolm McDowell plays the head vampire, which is pretty awesome as well. So, this being Billy and Mandy, of course it's going to be a lot of dark humor. And there's nothing wrong with that. When you see so many Christmas specials try to be heartwarming and sweet, it's nice to have one or two that's dark and edgy. I'm gonna be honest and say, when I was a kid, I used to find Billy's antics to be hilarious, and now as an adult, not so much. They're mostly pretty annoying. So I didn't really find too much of this to be funny, except for a few one-liners. But it had a pretty good plot with some good twists and a nice action sequence or two. So it definitely kept me entertained. Oh, and this has to be the only time in history that Santa Claus's naughty and nice list has been used as a metaphor for dirty things you can do on the computer. Also of note is the fact that Scar is in this, despite the fact that Scar was also in Christmas Con Carne, where there was a different Santa Claus that definitely wasn't played by Gilbert Gottfried. You know what? Just this one time, I'm fine with continuity being broken, because it meant we got Gilbert Gottfried. Aside from Billy, though, there were a few things that bothered me. Like the fact that there are 2 songs in this, and they both kinda suck. One is just Mandy quietly singing a Christmas song, and the other is Grim and the head vampire singing a song about traveling or something. Both of these could have been big, over-the-top, and catchy music numbers, but instead they're just kinda quiet things that happen. I feel like they weren't used to their full potential. I'd say it's an enjoyable experience overall, and it's worth watching if for no other reason than to see Gilbert Gottfried hamming it up as Vampire Santa. Though unfortunately, the only easy place to see this is on DVD or Cartoon Network itself. So check it out if it's on. Operation Naughty. Oh, whoops, wrong show. Sector V is framed for a Christmas crime. One thing I really love about The Kids Next Door is how imaginative it is. You have to be pretty imaginative to come up with the idea to parody the X-Men and the Fantastic Four in your Christmas special. Because that's what happens here. They parody the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, and the narrator sounds like Stan Lee. So yeah, the members of Santa's Alpha Strike Squad are Wintergreen, who's a parody of Wolverine, but instead of claws he has peppermint sticks. The Nutcracker, who has teleportation powers and his name is a pun on Nightcrawler. Snow Angel, who can fly and has power over snow like Storm. And Carnivorous, who's covered in pine needles and a reference to Colossus. And opposing them is the Faculty Four, who are substitute teachers who want more people to be aware of Substitute Teachers Day. Mr. Physically Fit-tastic, the Unintelligible Tutor, Thesaurus Rex, and the Human Text. I mean, what is there even to say about this episode? It features some great action, a nice twist, and has a lot of sweet moments between number 3 and number 4. Oh, and there is tons of Christmassy references. There's a reference to Grandma got run over by a reindeer. The Alpha Strike Team's final attack is the 12 Days of Christmas, and if you look closely, most of them are puns, like one of the members of the Partridge Family is inside of a pear tree. The only real complaint I have is that you would expect to see more interactions with Santa Claus and the kids next door. When you really think about it, Santa Claus would probably be the best adult ally the kids next door have. You'd think they would have made a bigger deal out of the fact that Santa Claus is probably the greatest good adult on the show ever. So I kinda wish that had been explored a little bit more. Maybe with the adult villains confronting Santa Claus about how he shouldn't be helping kids and should be helping adults. But hey, I'm not complaining with what we got. This is pretty awesome. You can currently find it on Netflix, DVD, iTunes, and hopefully on Cartoon Network. And I do recommend you check it out. And that is every Cartoon Christmas special reviewed. In general, I'd say these specials are very, very original and creative. And once again, not a single one of them was a Christmas Carol parody. I hope you enjoyed this and have a very Merry Christmas. Pie Guy Rules, out.